greatest bands of the 70s. Aside from the usual suspects, Led Zeppelin, the Eagles, Van Halen, there were a lot of great bands. In what might be the strangest decade of music, and also the greatest decade of music, a lot of these bands got lost in the shuffle. On today's show, we're going to pull some up, dust them off, and put them out there. Maybe you think they're great, maybe you don't. We'll find out. Enjoy the show.
The KOFB studio presents Milk Crates and Turntables, a music discussion podcast, hosted by Scott McLean with his co-host, Jack Calabrese. Now, let's talk music. Enjoy the show.
All right. Thank you, Amanda, for that introduction. Last week I said interview. Well, welcome to Milk Crates and Turntables, a music podcast. We're streaming live over Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Twitch right now. But for all the listeners, we are now on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and a number of other platforms. Just search for Milk Crates and Turntables. So without further ado, let me bring on my co-host, Mr. Jackie Calabrese. Jack Calabrese, what's up, buddy?
Good evening, Mr. McLean.
How you doing?
Thank you for having me again. How's it going?
It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. Love to share the knowledge that we've acquired over a combined. Probably, if you think about it, we have a good 90 years of music knowledge between us. It says we're old, actually.
Yeah. Two of the contributing cast members of the movie Cocoon.
Yeah. Hey, okay.
What are you wearing today? Who do you got on you?
It's the little Joe Strummer shirt.
All right.
Yeah. Well, we're in the today's topic is greatest 70s bands, best 70s bands. There's a lot of greatness in there, and let's get right to it. So, usually, how we do this for the listeners. Me and Jack bounce back and forth. I usually have a list. He has a list. So we'll jump right into it. Best bands of the 70s. So the 70s is an interesting decade. As I said in the intro, it is probably one of the craziest and most interesting decade of music. We grew up in a decade, probably the best music ever came out of the 70s. So we have some bleed-ins from the 60s. I think we can deal with that. Are they really 70s bands? We'll discuss that. It depends on what group you bring up.
Well, there are definitely bands. There are definitely bands that started in the 60s and blossomed in the 70s.
Absolutely.
The other thing about music of the 70s, greatest bands of the 70s is our age. I mean, that's our demographic. That's where we were first really kind of introduced into music and found music, outside of what our parents maybe have introduced us to. And it's it's definitely a decade that had, first off, it had a crazy start. I mean, if you think about it, in the first year, you had Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, and Jimi Hendrix all died in the first year, maybe 10 months that they all passed. Less than a year later, you had the breakup of the Beatles. Pretty much the end of the 60s. Right before the decade started. Altamont took place in December of '69. There's a lot of people that attribute that to the real death of the hippie movement, that and the Manson thing.
Oh, it killed the hippie movement. Definitely killed the hippie movement, just like grunge killed hair metal.
Yeah.
There's always those death blows. I have the joke. Nirvana killed Loverboy. That was it.
That is something that we should absolutely give Nirvana credit for.
Oh, that's a whole nother show. That's coming. That whole thing is coming. So let's jump right into it. Now, I'm not going to go in any particular order. So, my first isn't necessarily, I think, the greatest. Maybe we'll come up at the end of the episode. What we think is, got to go with the commonsensical pick of the Rolling Stones. So, although they had 6 albums from 65 to 69, from 71 to 78, they also put out 6 albums, and those 6 albums are legendary albums. So you got Sticky Fingers in 71, Exile on Main Street in 72, Goat's Head Soup in 73, It's Only Rock and Roll in 74, Black and Blue in 76, and maybe my favorite Stones album, Some Girls, in 78. So that's 6 top-notch 70s kick-ass albums.
Did Emotional Rescue just cross over the line? Was that like 80?
Yeah, 80, 81, I think. Yeah. So I got to go, and I'm a purist in a sense, but there's certain groups you just can't leave out. I like the pure groups that if we're going to talk the 70s, they were the 70s. They started in the 70s and matured through the 70s. But so my first pick for best bands of the 70s, I got to give it to the Rolling Stones. That's just doesn't mean my top pick. It's my first pick.
It's funny you say that, because that's the first band that I wrote and wrote down almost the exact same list, although I will admit that I forgot about It's Only Rock and Roll. I was trying to do it off the top of my head. So of those albums that they put up,
off the top of our head, there's a lot of knowledge.
And so of all of those albums, do you have a favorite? Don't say it.
I do.
Okay, on 3, say your favorite Rolling Stones album of the 70s, and probably your favorite Rolling Stones album. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Sticky
Exile
Fingers.
on Main Street. No.
Well, they were back to back. They were back to back albums.
Yeah, I love Sticky Fingers, but I think that Exile is a better record, and maybe the fact that it's a double album and there's just so much to it.
Oh, it's a phenomenal album. All those albums are top notch. So, and they are probably in the top. If you were going to have a top 50 of the 70s, all 6 of those albums are in it.
Yeah. So one of my earliest memories, about music. So I got the love of music from my dad. My father was a big music fan, quasi hippie and all of that. And I remember when he brought home Sticky Fingers. If you remember, the iconic album cover of the crotch shot designed by Andy Warhol. Yep. And with the zipper and the bulge, and looking at it as a 5 or 6 year old going, I don't like this. This is weird.
Yeah, when you unzip it, there's the guy in his underwear right behind the cover.
That's right.
And and it was a great concept album cover. Unfortunately, it ruined every fucking copy of. There is not a pure copy of Sticky Fingers in existence, because when they all got pressed together and sent out to record stores, every one of those did something. They didn't ruin the album, but there's always a little scratch, a little dent somewhere.
Yeah.
So
the other thing about Sticky Fingers, I think one of the commonest misconceptions, I'm gonna have to check this because I might be wrong, but a lot of people, give credit to Andy Warhol for creating the tongue logo, and I don't think he did.
Created the
I think
what?
where they get mixed up, that he created the iconic tongue logo.
Oh,
and I don't think he did. I think people got mixed up because he was the one that actually designed that album cover.
Right. Right.
So,
So what
so
do you
what
got?
you know what made those first couple of albums just unbelievable, and we've kind of talked about this before. It was Mick Taylor. That was the best band that group had ever put together, the best lineup that band had ever put together.
Absolutely. So what do you got for me?
So I think that this might be somewhat out of left field, but I think that if you think of the legends of the 70s, you have to put Stevie Wonder in there.
Oh, no doubt. I've
Stevie
got.
Wonder was
I,
he ruled the 70s, Innovision, Song in the Key of Life. I mean, just think about it. I mean, from a single standpoint, just in the 70s, Sunshine of My Life, Superstition, Living for the City, Don't You Worry About a Thing, Higher Ground, Boogie on Reggae Woman, Sir Duke, Isn't She Lovely, I Wish, Master Blaster. I mean, he collected so many Grammys. He was,
get like
one of the biggest sellers.
7 Grammys.
Yeah. Stevie Wonder ruled, which, by the way, an interesting thing that even though he had that command in the 70s, when he played, or when the Rolling Stones played in 72, Stevie Wonder at the Garden in Boston, Stevie Wonder was the opening act.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that's the famous story, and I don't know if it was 72 or 75, but it was when they got into a little bit of trouble, and Mayor White got them a police escort
Yeah.
out of I think it was Rhode Island, and they just kept telling Stevie Wonder, just keep playing, just keep playing, just keep playing, just keep playing. And finally, though, I think they went on stage at like 1:00 in the morning.
Living for the City, one of my favorite songs of all time. One of the most probably underrated songs of the 70s because you never really hear it played because of its content. Living for the City was that moment, that Marvin Gaye moment for Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
When Marvin Gaye came out with What's Going On, Stevie Wonder did Living for the City, and they all had the same message. Shit ain't right.
The other thing that Stevie Wonder did that people may or may not realize was he actually broke open another artist that was absolutely huge in the 70s, which was Bob Marley.
No. Yeah. Okay. Stevie Wonder, I can't complain. This is another show, again, that we'll discuss this, but I say Stevie Wonder is the most talented individual in the history of music. And I've gotten hammered for that. People always like, no, and they'll come up with like the lead singer, Paul Rodgers. No, you're missing what I'm saying. Stevie Wonder was extremely talented, and he did it blind. We all know that. I'm not, there's no big surprise there, but the stuff that he did since he was a kid. So if I'm going to say the greatest talent in the history of music, I'd say Stevie Wonder, and then is 1, and Prince is 1A.
Well, Stevie Wonder can play bass. He can play guitar. He obviously can play keyboards. He obviously
can play the harmonica.
The harmonica. He writes. He produces. He can do it all. And by the way, can I go on just a slight tangent for a second? So, when I had a job that took me literally around the world a couple of times. And my first time in Australia, I was staying at the Intercontinental Hotel in Sydney. And at my hotel, all at the same time, was Jerry Lewis, Slipknot, Pink, Kenny Rogers, and Stevie Wonder. And I was going to a business meeting, and I was riding in the elevator, and I was literally on an elevator with Stevie Wonder in his entourage. And I was just looking at him. I was awestruck. And when we got off in the lobby, I grabbed one of his guys by the arm, and I was like, hey, I don't want to be an asshole, but does he sign autographs? And he goes, yeah, he can sign autographs. And I was just like, well, I didn't want to put out a piece of paper and have him sign my elbow.
I was going to say.
They shuffled him out of there so quick I couldn't get it. But I stood 1.5 feet from Stevie Wonder.
What would have been funny is if you got on the elevator and he's the one that pressed the button.
Or if he turned around and said, Jack.
Yeah. How the fuck did Slipknot fit into that group? Anyways. So I'm going to come up with my second choice for best bands of the 70s. Has to be the Eagles, right? They got to be in there.
Sure.
So they came out, and I did a little more research. Yeah, there's a lot of little bits of information that you kind of forget. So you look at the albums that they put out. The Eagles, self-titled in 72, Desperado 73, On the Border 74, One of These Nights 75, Hotel California 76, and The Long Run in 79. So you kind of forget about Desperado and On the Border, but then you look at them and you look at the track list. Every one of those albums had 2 or 3 great songs on it. That's why their greatest hits album is the number one selling album of all time.
Yeah, I mean, it's been for a long time. For some reason, I think that something displaced it recently.
But was it the Go-Go's greatest hits?
I think it could be the Go-Go's greatest hits, because all of their albums had just great stuff. Their version of Hotel California is just unbelievable. So look, I have a love-hate relationship. I can't argue with them. They were a huge band, tons of great songs. For me, it's I guess they even label themselves as kind of like a country rock band, and there are songs by the Eagles that I love. Life in the Fast Lane, Hotel California, One of These Nights. Love all of those, but there is probably just as many of their songs that I fucking hate.
Now, do you hate them because they were overplayed or just?
Yeah, probably. I mean, look, in some of them just, I don't know, they're just, in my mind, they're just lame. Like New Kid in Town, or like Lion Eyes, or even Peaceful, Easy Feeling. I just don't dig them.
I want to lie with you in the desert at night.
Hey, Scott, come on, there are people listening. Don't proposition me.
That's one of the greatest lines in music. That's a great opening line.
Yeah.
So
they're a great band. There's just some of their songs. Look, I love U2. There's some of their songs that I hate. I love the Beatles. There's some of their songs that I hate.
Okay, what do you got for me? Let's bring it.
So, well, one of the other bands that I think, being from Boston, you can't deny the fact that Aerosmith were a monster band in the 70s. Starting in 73. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I really appreciate about the 70s is that was the era where, you really had to be a workhorse. I mean, most bands put out an album and did a tour every year. In some of those early albums, like Get Your Wings and even their first album, they put out those records. They recorded them in, 3 weeks. Where, now bands, it takes them 3-4 years, for them to put out something that's not nearly as good as they were. So, that I've undertaken the hobby of painting. They say the way that you actually become a good painter is that, you can study, you can watch videos, you can read books, you can look at art. But the way that you become a good painter is easel time. It's standing in front of that easel and painting and making a total mess over and over until you actually get better and better and better. And I think that the bands in the 70s, particularly a band like Aerosmith, that were on the road and writing constantly, that their craft got better and better until it really took its toll and just started beating the hell out of them. And the drugs got into it and probably way overtired and whatnot. But I mean, you think about the list that we just talked about in terms of, the Rolling Stones, but Aerosmith's debut album, Get Your Wings, Rocks, Toys in the Attic. I mean, monster album after monster album.
So there's a trend that you'll see or you'll hear for the listeners on these lists that I have. So Aerosmith, everybody refers to their debut album as featuring Dream On, because that's the only other words on the cover, right? 73, Get Your Wings, 74, Toys in the Attic, 75, Rocks, 76, Draw the Line, 77. Going back to the Stones, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75. These groups were just pumping out great album after great album. And you don't know it at the time until you take a step back and you look at the music. Like what studios were these in? Because you had Zeppelin, you had the Stones, you had Aerosmith, you had the Eagles, you had all these, all pumping them out. They're all coming out at the same time. Each year there was 7 phenomenal albums. You can't find that shit today. You couldn't find that in the 90s or the 80s, I don't think. The 70s was insane. These groups, just like you said, Easel Time, it's get in the studio. It's just keep going until you perfect it.
Yeah.
So, Aerosmith, there's no argument there. Let's see. What do I want to roll with right now? Okay, well, I'm just going to gloss over this one. This isn't my pick, but one of the viewers, Stacy, said The Who. Now, The Who had 4 albums in the 60s, from 65 to 69. What you said at the beginning of the show, they hit their real stride in the 70s, but they only put out 4 albums in the 70s. You had Who's Next in 71, Quadrophenia
in 73.
Then you had the Who by Numbers in 75.
75.
And Who Are You
in 78.
So, I mean, great albums, but I don't know if I would put them up there because these other bands were like 6, 7, 8 albums in the 70s. Now, if we want to talk great albums, The Who is in there. But I don't know if they're one of the great bands of the 70s because they had just as many albums in the 60s.
So, listen, not for nothing, Scott, but it's no fun for our listeners when you and I agree on everything, but I happen to agree with you on this. This The Who is one of my favorite bands of all time, and I adore them. Tommy and Who's Next and Quadrophenia. But the reality of it is, at least from my perspective, is they're a band that hit their creative peak, but then the excess crept in. I don't know if they were overtired, overtoured, or whatnot. But The Who by Numbers, not a great record. Who Are You? Not a great record.
No, there's a
couple of great songs.
Yeah. And that's the thing when you bought an album when you were a kid. If it had 3 good songs on it, you were lucky. So
hey,
let me get
Johnny Cash just joined us. Woo, Johnny.
Johnny Cash. So let me get to my pick. I'm going to cross those. So the 70s had 4 genres of music at the same time. You had rock. The 70s introduced us to soft rock, which is now today called yacht rock, disco, and country rock, which eventually became known as southern rock. And the kings of southern rock, hands down, and a pure 70s band is...
Rush.
Oh, you son of a bitch. No.
Leonard Skinner.
The Allman Brothers.
Skinner or the Allman Brothers. Take your pick. In the Allman Brothers, better band in my opinion, although apples and oranges, and it's hard to compare art. But once again, I agree with you. A band that kind of came out of the 60s. Dwayne Allman, journeyman musician, did a lot down in Muscle Shoals. He was a studio musician, played with like Aretha Franklin. But then did the whole Derek and the Dominoes thing. Not to mention those early Allman Brothers albums.
He was the one. Dwayne Allman came up with the riff for Layla. That was his.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know those things.
Monster guitar player. Unfortunately died really young. Motorcycle accident. No, he was not hit by a peach truck. He didn't run
into a peach truck. That was the.
No, it was a construction vehicle. It had like a crane on it, and he was trying to navigate it. He avoided it, but he ended up hitting part of the crane, which
24 years old. 24 years old. And a year later, the bass player, 24 years
Barry
old.
Oakley.
dies in a motorcycle accident on the same
Yep.
day.
Yep. Yep.
Strange. So,
So
I'm going
you know,
with the Allman Brothers.
great band. You know, in a band that carried on for a lot of years. But I mean, obviously, they were at their creative peak in those early years when they were, they were journeymen. They worked on that stuff every day. If you actually even see the documentary on Leonard Skinner,
Yeah.
they found a shack that had no air conditioning. And they worked at that place. I think they called it the Hell House or something like that,
In the middle of
where
nowhere.
they worked on their craft for months and months and months.
Ronnie Van Zant was he was hard nosed. I have to interrupt. John Cash, our lifelong friend, said Charlie Daniels. He went to the Charlie Daniels concert with us, and I phrase it that way for a reason. He went to the Charlie Daniels concert with us at the concert on the Commons when the Boston Commons used to have concerts in the summertime. We all us, city boys wearing cowboy hats and acting, redneckish was pretty funny in itself. But John went with us. I don't think he remembers it. I don't think he saw a minute of it. Because the highlight of that concert was when 9 of us were carrying him out above us like he was in a coffin. And he totally obliviated it. I'm sorry, JC. I just got to put that out there. It's you like Leo Haskell and a couple other people are in my memory hall of fame. So
yeah. So hey, let's
sidetracked.
let's go back to your comment. So you actually said, okay, in the 70s you had the emergence of kind of straight ahead rock, country rock, disco
and soft rock.
Well, so we didn't touch upon 2 genres that I think that really emerged in the 70s. One of them was punk rock, and the other one was prog rock.
Not a big fan.
What do you mean not a big fan? Come on.
I'm not a big fan of prog rock.
Come on, you don't jam out to King Crimson records and Gentle Giant and
you throw King Crimson. You throw King Crimson at me like I throw the Go-Go's at you. Okay, I get it. I see a trend each show.
There is some of that stuff that I kind of like. There's a few of the Yes albums. I thought Yes Fragile was a great record. The Yes album was a great record. I thought Emerson, Lake and Palmer had a couple of good songs, but these 23-minute opus things that centered around Tolkien, Lord of the Rings was a bit too much.
Rick Wakeman was a great showman, though.
Yeah, well, they were all great showmen.
He would come out with the long robes. He was like Ric Flair before Ric Flair.
So any one of those, early Genesis, King Crimson, Yes, and even Rush. You could go to any of those shows in the 70s, go to the Garden, wherever they were playing. Not one woman.
Yeah.
Not one person of color. It was a bunch of nerdy white guys.
Well, you just named 3 bands, and 2 of them, King Crimson and Genesis, are in my second tier 70s groups list. They're the second tier. They're the lower tier groups. But again, another topic. Let's move. Let's see what you got. What do you got for me?
Let's see. Another band. I'll tell you. So, one of my favorites in the 70s, and just trying to go off the beaten path a little bit. Not that they're not a popular band, but not your, Stones or any of that stuff. I loved the Doobie Brothers. The Doobie Brothers were a huge 70s band. I mean, those guys pumped out hit after hit, especially in the early 70s. China Grove, Taking It to the Streets. They just had one song after another that were just unbelievable, and they were part of the soundtrack of me being a little kid, mostly because my parents were big fans. Yeah, I know.
And this is an audio podcast, so no, the Doobie Brothers. You can't really argue with the Doobie Brothers. No, they're a pure 70s band.
Yeah, relatively harmless band. No big controversies.
No, good music.
Do you remember? Do you remember in the 70s? What TV show did they appear on?
The Doobie Brothers appeared in the 70s.
They were on an episode of What's Happening.
Maybe we should do a podcast on old TV shows and movies. All right. So then there's Pink Floyd. Again, they had 3 albums from 67 to 69. They come out in 70 with Adam Hot Mother. 71 Metal. 72 Obscured by the Clouds. They're kind of hanging in there. So that's 6 albums that really... And then they hit their stride with, of course, in 73, Dark Side of the Moon. Then they fire off in 75, Wish You Were Here, Animals in 77, The Wall in 79. And there's a reason they skip years. All these other bands are pumping them out one a year. They're technical. They're a very technical band. Yeah. And that's why their music came out so pristine. It was like there's not a speck of dust on it.
Yeah.
Right?
I'll tell you.
In the 70s, though they only had, they had 7 albums, 4 of them were classics. But I'll give them a nod.
They should be given a nod. I mean, Pink Floyd was a seminal band of the 70s, and I'll tell you, a source of real frustration for me. And I don't know if you share this or not, but being in the Boston area, being of our age group, we kind of got screwed concert wise. And let me explain what I mean. So, obviously, none of us. Maybe there's somebody else that's actually listening that had an opportunity to see the Beatles, but they stopped touring in 66, right? The Stones, like when we came of age and we became, like concert going age, the last time that the Stones played Boston was 75, I believe. In 78, they did a big tour, didn't play Boston. In 81, they didn't play Boston. They didn't come to Foxborough until 1989. So no Stones for us in our prime concert going years when we were teenagers. Pink Floyd, the same thing. They played the Garden, I think, in 77, and then didn't come back until they played Foxborough in the mid 80s without Roger Waters. So in the, back when they kind of put together a band. So no Rolling Stones, no Pink Floyd. Led Zeppelin was supposed to play the Garden in 75. So they announced that tickets were going on sale at the beginning of January. 3,000 people show up at the Garden. They're waiting outside. The tickets are going on sale the next morning at 10 o'clock. There's 2 to 3,000 people lined up at 5 p.m. It's the middle of winter, and these boneheads are wearing jean jackets and T-shirts. Temperature drops down into the single digits. They let them into the gardens, into the outer part of the gardens to keep warm until the tickets go on sale. People are smoking dope, drinking Boone's Farm. They break open concession stands. They get down into the stadium part of the Garden. They open fire hoses and start spraying everywhere. They light a bunch of the seats on fire. They cause $30,000 in damage. The next day, Kevin White comes and tours the carnage, the damage, and says Led Zeppelin will never play in Boston again. He wouldn't issue a license for them to play in 75. As a result, they skipped Boston in 77. They skipped Boston in 80, which never happened anyway because Bonham died. So we got screwed out of seeing Zeppelin as well.
And that's but we saw a lot of other bands.
Yeah, we got to see a lot of other bands, but a lot of those iconic bands that we grew up with, we never got to see them or even the original lineup. Like even the Who, I was fortunate to go with a bunch of people to see them in 79, but by then Keith Moon was already gone.
I saw that. I was at that show. Let me ask you this. One of our viewers just chatted in. I've never seen Martha Hoople. Have you seen Martha Hoople?
Martha Hoople?
Yeah, Martha. Martha.
So when Martha left the Vandellas, she joined
Martha
the
left
Hoople?
for Martha Hoople. It's
So wait a minute. Martha left the Vandellas, went to the Hoople, and then joined the Motels.
just I don't know. So one of the other viewers chatted in. David Bowie, not a band. He's an individual. We're leaving them out of this episode. This is just bands. And
Although one could say that the 70s were ruled by, I already talked about individual Stevie Wonder, David Bowie, right. Individual Elton John.
But I don't count them as bands. I gave you Stevie Wonder because he's the greatest. I think I would have argued with you, but I can't because I have said he's the most talented. So, and he actually won like 27 Grammys in the 70s. No one's ever done that. But, okay, is it your turn or my turn?
You can go.
Okay. The hottest working band of the 70s.
The Go-Go's.
They put out 10 albums, one album a year in the 70s. They actually put one album out a year for, I think it was 21 years.
No kidding.
Yep. And I'm not going to say they're a crossover. Chicago's first album, they were the Chicago Transit Authority in 69.
Yeah.
They had to change the name to just Chicago. From that point on, 1970, Chicago 1. 72, Chicago 2. All the way up to 79. They did 10 albums in the 70s.
They were terrible at naming albums.
Evidently. They had PTSD from having to change the name from the Chicago Transit Authority. But Chicago has to be in that on that list. They pumped out.
I agree with you, and I think they're overlooked. And I think one of the reasons that they're overlooked is because what they did in the 80s. When they turned into that kind of soft rock band,
yeah,
I think it kind of destroyed them. And I think that one of the other things that kind of affected Chicago is, Terry Kath, who was an amazing guitar player, made the great mistake of getting drunk and playing with a pistol and playing Russian roulette, and he lost. And he actually did it in front of a bunch of people. Just crazy. But those early records were unbelievable. I mean, just the musicianship alone, just crazy.
Oh, they were so unique in their style too. Who would have thought that a horn section could lead a band? In that era of all the bands we've just named, a band with a horn section takes over and does 10 albums. Didn't miss a beat. So I got to go with Chicago. What do you got for me?
Not that they had a real evolution, but you can't take away that the fact that one of the iconic bands of the 70s was Fleetwood Mac.
I disagree.
What do you mean you do? How can you disagree that Fleetwood Mac is not an iconic band? Rumors? Is there a more perfect album than Rumors? The story behind it, track after track. You may not like it.
I didn't say I don't like them.
You don't have to say it. I can see it on your fucking face.
They did 8 albums before 1975's self-titled album Fleetwood Mac.
But they were a different band in the 70s. Whole different line.
Albums. They emerged in 75 as the group that we know. They're not a great group if you can't remember anything before the self-titled album Fleetwood Mac in 75.
Totally. Come on. Rumors is one of the biggest selling albums of all time. On the radio, almost constant.
If you want to talk about great albums, we could talk about great albums on another show. But as one of just because they have Rihanna and whatever. Don't stop thinking about whatever. They're not one of the greatest.
You don't dislike them.
No, I don't. I'm mocking them because they're not one of the greatest bands of the 70s. They're not. They had 2 good albums in the 70s. 3. They had 3 good albums in the 70s. That was it. That was it.
So 3 good albums in the 70s. The Who had 2 good albums in the 70s.
And I said the Who really the only reason I brought the Who is because our friend Stacy chatted in the Who, and I said they're not. They're not. They're not one of the. They have great albums in the 70s. Yeah. They put on great.
I'm sorry, but I disagree. Fleetwood Mac is an iconic band, and they emerged and had their greatest success. Hold on a second. They had.
Hold on a second.
You're out of order. I'm out of order.
Everybody's out of order.
They had their greatest success in the 70s. Look, you can't limit it to, look, you have to have a certain run of albums to qualify as some of the greatest artists in the 70s. Look, one of the biggest artists in the 70s, one of the most iconic artists of the 70s, and I'm not saying that he's great or not great, was Meatloaf. That album was enormous. It was huge. It's indicative of the 70s.
Memory in the 70s is not one of the great performers of the 70s.
Say that again?
He's a memory in the 70s. That's what
marked time in the 70s. That album was huge. One of the biggest selling albums of all time.
And why? Why was it? Because of one song?
No, not one song.
2.
Bat Out of Hell was a big song. 2 Out of 3 was a big song. Paradise by the Dashboard Light was a big song.
That's the song.
No, that album was regarded as flawless from start to finish.
We're talking about great albums. I'm talking about great bands of the 70s.
I'll tell you what. I'll give it to you there. In that album was really a byproduct of one writer, one singer, and a bunch of hired guns.
Yes. As a matter of fact, the girl that sang the backup quit before they even did the video. The girl in the video isn't the one that does the vocals.
Carla Bonoff?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you
here's a little known thing that you might not know is on that Meatloaf album, playing the piano and drums, Max Weinberg and Roy Bittan from the E Street Band, which was my next pick because Springsteen was enormous in the 70s.
So that's a good question now. It's not a question. That's an interesting pick. So Bruce Springsteen in the E Street Band, is that considered a group, or is that Bruce Springsteen with this backup group? Bob Seger in the Silver Bullet Band, is that a group, or is that Bob Seger with the backup group? The Steve Miller Band. The Steve Miller Band was a complete band, but it's Steve Miller with the Steve Miller Band.
Yeah.
That's kind of a gray area.
Well, there have been albums put out by Bruce Springsteen that are just Bruce Springsteen.
Not in the 70s, though.
No, his first 3 albums were. I'd have to go back and look at him, but he was actually signed as an individual artist on those first 3 records. And he really hit his stride, obviously, with Born to Run, which I think is a flawless, iconic 70s album, followed up by Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Yeah.
I know that he's one of those guys that, you love him or you hate him, but you can't deny the fact that he's got crazy talent and he's put out a ton of great songs.
Nebraska is one of my favorite albums. And it was him
by
himself in his basement. Those were all demos. Nebraska was all demos. The E Street Band didn't know he was doing it. And then he just decided to, hey, guys, I'm going to release this on my own. So
hey, can I go off on a slight tangent? So
sure.
Kevin Corkum just said wings were nothing but Paul. So here's something that I have to tell you. One of the biggest mistakes of the 70s, the Beatles absolutely should have not broken up and stayed together. I don't think any one of them put out a great great album. I think there were great songs. I think they were close to great albums.
George Harrison's album was probably the best of them all.
It was the best of them all, but you know where
He
he
had all
fucked up?
those songs saved up from when he was with the Beatles.
Yeah, but you know where he screwed up? He made it a triple album. If he had made that a single record, that would have been huge.
Can you name another?
It was huge on its own. But you have that whole third disc, that's nothing but jams. But you know what? I just because I knew that we were doing this, I actually looked at like the first couple of albums that were actually put out by the Beatles as solo artists, and they're not great records. None of them are great records. Even Band on the Run, which is probably the most popular outside of All Things Must Pass, and I still don't think it's a great record. So one of the things that I did, and let me see if I can find it, is I actually put together my fantasy Beatle album. So if the Beatles had stayed together and they were writing the way that they did, and like toward the latter part of the Beatles' career, they were writing a lot. They were doing things on an individual basis. So just check this out for a second. If the Beatles actually had put out an album in 72, 73, I didn't go beyond that. I didn't go into the Wings years. I didn't get too far into it. So here's my fantasy Beatle album. And I actually tried to sequence this where it made sense, which was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. So Beatles fantasy album and kicks off with Instant Karma, goes into Maybe I'm Amazed, into My Sweet Lord, into God, into All Things Must Pass, then What Is Life, Imagine, It Don't Come Easy, Wah Wah, My Love, Isn't It a Pity, Jealous Guy, Cold Turkey, Working Class Hero, Photograph, Another Day, Happy Christmas, War Is Over, Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey, and Give Peace a Chance.
Sounds like a mixtape to me.
If they had put that out as a double record under the Beatles, it would have been regarded as one of their best.
Let me ask you a question. Trivia, not trivia, but can you name another triple album set?
Yes songs. So the Yes Live album. If you're getting into compilations and live albums, I think
it's not a compilation or a live album, it's just a 3-album set.
Yeah, I think maybe Emerson, Lake and Palmer Works might be a triple.
The one that comes to mind to me is the Clash, Sandinista.
Yeah.
So triple record.
Great record.
Yes, I like it. I like
it too.
So John just chatted in, one of our viewers for the podcast listeners, Alice Cooper. The amazing thing about Alice Cooper is they put out 6 albums in 3.5 years as a band. Okay? So it was Easy Action in 70, Love It to Death 71, Killer in 71, School's Out in 72, $1 Billion Babies in 73, Muscle of Love in 73. Then Alice Cooper went on his own after that. So I wouldn't say as the Alice Cooper band is one of the greatest bands, although School's Out, $1 Billion Babies, Muscle of Love was an okay album. I was an Alice Cooper fan.
Yeah, me too.
But then, he went on his own, Welcome to My Nightmare. And after Welcome to My Nightmare, he kind of started on a decline. Yeah. I think that whole thing.
In the early 70s, Alice Cooper was.
You pumped out 6 albums in 3.5 years.
Do you know who broke
out 2 albums in a year?
Do you know who broke Alice Cooper, that band? Frank Zappa.
That's right, he did, yeah. And I'm not a big fan of Frank Zappa and the Mothers, but we will not get into that. So let me see, what else do we got? What do I want to look at? I get over here.
So let me. What about Queen?
I was just going to say Queen. Okay. Queen is interesting. Queen had 7 albums in the 70s. Queen, their debut album, 73. Queen 2 in 74. Sheer Attack in 74, which had Killer Queen on it. Right? So you had... Now, these next 2, in 75, they came out with A Night at the Opera.
Night at the Opera.
In 76, they came out with A Day at the Races. Where did they get the names for those albums?
Marx Brothers.
There you go, buddy. The Marx Brothers movies. Yeah. Yeah. So those were really when they took off. Then after that, News of the World, and then Jazz in '78, and then they kind of disappeared to the '80s. But
So let's talk about that for a second. The band Queen is a bigger band now than they were in the '80s.
Right.
Well, the late '70s and early '80s, people don't remember, but that Queen was not that popular. Like, I got to see Queen in '82. They played one night at the Garden, and I remember friends saying, why are you going to see them? Has been there, done that, all of that. They were not a popular band. They had some real misses that didn't resonate with U.S. audience. They were huge everywhere else in the world, but they were not huge in the United States. And by the way, while we're talking about that, did you like the movie?
I won't see it.
Why?
We lived it. I don't go back on those, the rockumentary movies, whatever you want to call them.
So I'll give you even more of a reason.
Either, and I won't see that either.
Yeah, I'll give you even more of a reason not to see the Queen movie. It's a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah,
it's a good movie. It's really entertaining and whatnot, but they've taken artistic license there.
Nothing Hollywood does in the last 8 years, last 8 years, is worth seeing. It's all crap.
Yeah. So just I'll spoil it for you a little bit, and so you don't have to see it. But in the movie, a lot of it really kind of revolves around the performance at Live Aid.
Yeah.
And they have this whole dramatic thing where he leaves the band and he's ostracized, and they're not speaking to each other. And then he finds out that he has HIV, and then they get together and they have a terrible time rehearsing, and then they have this amazing performance. In reality, Live Aid happened in '85. He didn't find out that he had HIV until '87. And this whole thing about them, being kind of separated and not being rehearsed and whatnot, they had been on the Works tour for about 18 months. And they had been off for about 5 or 6 weeks before they played Live Aid. So they took great artistic liberty with that movie. A lot of people look at it as historical fact, and there's a lot of fiction in that movie.
Oh, I bet. So Dave Phillips has chatted in Deep Purple. Now, Deep Purple's interesting. They were one of those groups that kind of crossed over from the 60s to the 70s. Deep Purple. In '70, they had the album In Rock. Then they had Machine Head in '71, which was a great album. Deep Purple came out with Made in Japan, yada yada. Is Deep Purple a great '70s band, or were they a band that had a couple of great albums and carried them through the '70s?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of bands like that. I think that that Deep Purple was a big heavy metal band, had its following in the.
And I like them, by the way. Don't get. I
do
like,
too.
I like Deep Purple. I love Deep Purple. I say maybe,
but for me, there's only one Deep Purple album. Made in Japan.
Machine Head is a really good album.
It's great. And there's a couple of them. Like I like Burn, as well. I mean, I think Deep Purple is a great band, and an interesting band where they had a revolving door of lead singers and personnel. I mean, Deep Purple was essentially Roger Glover and Richie Black. What's that?
Ian Gillan was it. He was it.
Ian Gillan, Joe Lynn Turner was fine. They were amazing in the early '70s. So but there's a lot of bands like that had early success and then kind of lived on that. One of the other bands that I was thinking about as we were talking about this. Think about the Moody Blues.
60s band.
Huge band in the '70s.
Yeah.
They had 2 big albums in the '60s, and they had a couple of good songs in the '70s.
Yeah. Yeah. And
You know,
that's what
and we may feel that way because neither of us are big, prog rock fans, and they
no.
kind of went in that
But
direction.
you mentioned Made in Japan. I say I consider that the greatest live album ever. I've said it in the past. But a very, very, if I was going to do a 1 and 1A, the Allman Brothers of Fillmore East is
Amazing record.
the
Amazing.
1A of greatest live albums ever.
How about the Last Waltz?
Last Waltz, and that's right up there at number 2 or 3, or in the top 5 definitely. And I gotta say, because I've said it before, Made in Japan was not tampered with. It was
Yeah.
not produced in a studio once it was done. And I'm not gonna go into all that again.
Well,
But
I think we have an opportunity to do an episode on live albums. But I'll tell you, one of the big '70s bands that had an amazing live album was Thin Lizzy. Fantastic.
I've never heard it, but I mean, I wasn't a huge Thin Lizzy fan. I liked them, but I wouldn't go out of my way.
They didn't get a lot of airplay over here.
Yeah, yeah. So a couple of people had said the Grateful Dead. No, 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 no Grateful Dead on this show.
Wait a minute, what's
No
wrong with the
Grateful
Grateful Dead?
No, 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 no. Don't. The Grateful Dead is not mentioned. No, they don't win anything on this show.
Why?
The Grateful Dead were horrible. They were horrible. They played just very basic jam, 17-minute long jams. They were a concert group. They were not, no Grateful Dead. I'm the host and I say no.
I'm sorry, but the Grateful Dead are an amazing band.
So are the Go-Go's, right?
So here's your homework assignment. You have to, between this week and next week, you have to go and listen to American Beauty.
I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I didn't do your last homework assignment.
All right. So I'll give you a choice. You can either listen to the Go-Go's last album or American Beauty.
I'm the host. I should be giving you lesson to homework and things.
Listen, you can't handle the truth.
Why? Don't pick on the host. Don't give me homework assignments. I didn't do the last one. I wasn't a good student in high school. I'm definitely not going to be a good student now.
I have to tell you, I love and hate the Grateful Dead. I love some of their songs. I hate some of their songs. I certainly don't think that they need, a whole side of an album to do one song. And having had the opportunity to see them a couple of times, there was certainly no need for all of the acid, lack of underarm deodorant, and patchouli.
Well, they weren't the brightest crowd either. One of our friends growing up, no names on this show when it comes to, they took a sheet of film and they exposed it to the light, so it turns all gray and black, right? They got it out of the graphic arts class. And what they did is they cut it up into little squares and went into the Boston Garden and sold them as hits of acid.
Oh my God! You shouldn't talk about Mr. Noyles right in front of everybody.
He was the teacher, and I'm going. Am I going to have to go back and beep that out? We don't need any love. Yeah, the Grateful Dead fans weren't the brightest bulbs in the house, but
the strange thing about it is most of the Grateful Dead were highly intellectual.
Yeah, and that's okay. So were the Police. Okay, the Police. Are they a great '70s band that traveled into the '80s?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I actually think that their best albums were in the '70s. The first two records are the best two records.
So you had the Police, and then what was the second one?
No, the first one was Atlantis D'Amour was the first one, and Regatta de Blanc was the second one. I think 78 and 79 respectively.
Which is the second album again. I'm a second album guy. I like Van Halen's second album better than the first. I like the Cars' Candy O better than the first, and I liked the Police's second album.
Yeah, and I feel the same way because a lot of those first albums got so overplayed. You know, the other thing that's interesting about the early days of the Police is I can't tell you how many people that I know in Winthrop that claim that they were at the Rathskeller, the Rat, when the Police played there in 78 or 79. Now that the Rathskeller, probably held 200 or 300 people. I don't know exactly what the capacity was. And there was almost everybody in that age demographic. I was there, and I don't think any of them were there.
We keep getting someone's throwing in the Ramones. The Ramones aren't better. They're not a great 70s band. They're
They helped kick off the punk movement. The Ramones' debut album is a seminal, iconic start of a movement band. Would you say that what about the Sex Pistols?
I said this 3 episodes ago. The Damned, and you're like, damn. The Damned were the originals. They were the first punks. They were the seminal album. They were the first to come over to America. They were the first to record an album, a punk album. Don't give me the Ramones.
You can't say that the Damned were the first punk band.
They were.
What about the Stooges? What about the MC5?
Stooges weren't recording before the Damned when it came to punk.
Yeah, they were. Origins of punk. You don't know what you're talking about, is you?
Here we go. It took us.
So wait a minute. What about the Sex Pistols? What about the Sex Pistols? Do they qualify considering they really only put out one record?
Again, that would fall in the category of great albums of the 70s.
What about great bands?
Wait a
minute. You don't consider them a great band considering what they helped kick off? They helped kick off an entire movement. More influential than Bad Company. More influential than Boston.
Again, you're talking about a very small genre at the time, a niche, and it's still a small genre. It's still a niche genre of music. Punk, and I like punk, was not disco. All right. Now you want to talk about a band, then you want to go down that road. Let's get down the road of disco. How come Chic, the greatest disco band of all times, with Nile Rodgers, one of the greatest producers, guitar players in the business, right? How come they never get recognized? Because it's disco.
Oh, wait a minute. They're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Huh?
They're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
They keep getting nominated, but they're not getting in.
I think they're in.
I don't think Chic is in. I think that they keep.
Wait a minute. We have a bet. $1 American.
Yeah, they're always on the list, but they haven't got in. So if you want to talk about that, then we can say Chic, and you can say the Sex Pistols. I like the Sex Pistols. I'm not putting them in one of the best bands because of a movement. The disco took over everything. Disco took over rock. You get the Rolling Stones doing disco songs. You had Rod Stewart doing disco songs. As a matter of fact, A Brick in the Wall, Part 2, has a disco beat to it. Think about it. So I'm not going. I like the Sex Pistols, but I'm not saying that genre took over anything. They were a movement. They were a movement because they got good publicity.
No, see, I think that they deserve credit in the 70s for changing the culture or helping change the culture. Now, the Damned, may have put out records before then, but they didn't necessarily have the mass appeal, and they didn't have the movement that changed
that
things.
Was a band thing. That was just them. If you don't have the right management, you don't have the right publicity, you're not going to get. The Damned never stopped, though. I mean, they still play today, but this is a discussion that keeps reoccurring, I guess. Reoccurring discussion. So
Bob McGrath just said the Pretenders, which I know you and I both love that first album.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I got it in my milk crates there. I'm pretty sure. Here it is. As a matter of fact, as far as you get it, there it is.
So what year was that?
What?
Was that in the 70s?
It was 80.
Yeah, 80, that's what 81. I thought.
Yeah.
That
Chrissy Hine played with the version of the Damned. There you go. There you
But
go.
by the way, I know that you're a purist, and I still have my original copy of the Pretenders, but I actually ordered the original master recording version of the Pretenders' first record
You want to
today.
master the original master? Shut it.
No, no, I'm just suggesting that I know how much you love it. I think you should get it.
I'm only kidding. I probably will. I probably will.
If you think you want to, you better act fast because those things sell out fast.
Well, actually, I kind of like this version. So for the viewing audience, I bought this in the Philippines. It's the Pretenders' first album, right? I bought this in the Philippines. It looks all normal, American printing. They don't have the Japanese label. But when you take it out, this is all pretty cool stuff right here. You get the Welcome 80s Pretenders Club, thing. And it's all in Japanese, right? And then you get the sleeve with all the lyrics in Japanese, which I kind of dig that, man.
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
I
probably
kinda
worth
dig
a
it.
couple of bucks.
I love albums with inserts. I love getting an album that still has the inserts.
That's
You
why I
know?
loved Kiss.
What's that?
I said that's why I loved Kiss.
Kiss was they were good at marketing those
Oh,
inserts.
come on, dude. Postcards, posters, tattoos, stickers.
Do you say Kiss is one of the great 70s bands?
Yeah, they were a huge band in the 70s. Come on, Destroyer, Love Gun, Rock and Roll Over, Kiss Alive 2.
I never got Kiss Alive 2. Because I couldn't get past one. One was so good that I wouldn't get to.
Yeah.
So
There's a huge difference between 1 and 2. I mean, Kiss Alive they were a hungry band, relatively, not unknown, but they weren't the big phenomenon in Kiss Alive 2. But I remember, listening to Destroyer and just going, what the hell is this? This is unbelievable.
I'm gonna go into a second tier band. I'm gonna name a couple of, and our friend Dave Phillips is gonna not like this at all. So if he says it's 79, then it must have come out late 79. The Pretenders album, still not a great 70s band because they had one album in the 70s. Jay Giles Band is a second tier 70s rock band. If you live outside of New England.
So let's talk about that for a second. So we talk about the different variations of rock in the 70s. One thing that the 70s gets credit for is corporate rock, arena rock.
Yeah.
That these second tier bands, and you can look at this online. This isn't anything that I made up. Boston, Kansas, Foreigner, REO Speedwagon, even Bad Company. There was a number of those bands, and the Jay Giles Band kind of fits into that category, where highly produced records that were really made to fill arenas. Did I say arenas? Arenas. And there's a lot of disdain for what happened in the 70s, that the corporate entities really took over rock and roll because they wanted to fill hockey arenas with predominantly teenage, blue class to middle class, white teenage boys, 18 to 25, which was the demographic that they were playing against.
Testosterone-driven music.
Yeah, it was all. The shame of it is a lot of those kind of like classic rock stations, they're still playing the same fucking songs over and over again.
But you know what?
Alabama, Boston's first album, Foreigner, a lot of those bands, and there were some of those really great bands that fit into that category or got pushed into that category, like Aerosmith got pushed into that category. Arena rock.
Yeah, no doubt. Heart. Classic.
Great
70s.
album, great band.
Yeah. Classic 70s band. Yeah. So I think, all right, we hit about an hour, buddy. Hour and 10 minutes. So I picked 15 bands tonight, and I think I covered them all. Oh, you know who I didn't cover? Who is a great 70s band, and they're a pure 70s band, Steely Dan.
Oh,
I was
fantastic
going
band.
to hit them up earlier, but I just kind of lost it.
They,
Steely Dan.
they were another band that we got screwed concert wise because they stopped touring in like
I got to
73.
see them, but I got to see them at the Hard Rock in Hollywood, Florida, and they were great.
Now,
They were,
Deb and I got to see him like 4 or 5 years ago at the Wang Center.
yeah,
Unbelievable.
the just you saw her before Walter Becker died, right?
Yeah, we did.
So they came out with "Can't Buy a Thrill" in '72, "Countdown to Ecstasy" in '73, "Pretzel Logic" '74, "Katie Lied" '75, "Royal Scam" '76,
Scam.
which is my favorite Steely Dan song. That's a
Asia.
great song. In Asia in '77.
Yeah.
Those albums right there, those 6 albums, could be put up against any other 6 albums in the '70s.
You know what I love about that band? You know
They
what I
are-
love about that band? So the last time that they came around to Boston, I think they played 4 nights. And one night they played Asia start to finish. One night they played Pretzel Logic from start to finish. One night they played the Royal Scam start to finish. And then one night they did a greatest hits. I mean, a band that can just delve into their catalog and play everything in an audience that is receptive enough that play me the whole friggin' record. I want to hear it all. It's
They
pretty
didn't
amazing.
they didn't tour it at
Forever.
first.
We never got to see them when they were, in their prime.
Because I guess to recreate their sound back then, it had, remember, they didn't have everything compact into computers.
Sure.
And boy, they had to bring all this shit on the road with them. And when they did go out on tour, it was evidently a spectacle. They had just truckloads of equipment. So, but I think they are definitely in the upper level '70s bands. And they also dominate yacht rock.
Do you have a favorite song?
Still, I said it, Royal Scam.
Oh yeah, no song. Oh, the song Royal Scam.
The song Royal
Wow.
Scam. That's my favorite. If everybody listening or watching, go out. If you haven't heard that song in a long time, go back and listen to it. Steely Dan, Royal Scam. An unbelievable song. That's the one I'm sticking with because now you're going to get me thinking about other songs. Royal Scam. It's always
So who's
the
it?
first.
John Larson said Billy Squire. I think he's 80s. Kevin Corkum says U2. Really more 80s.
I think he's just being. I
A
think
smart ass.
yeah, he's just in it. Do it again. All right, buddy. So
Great song.
I came up with 15 groups tonight. I think I covered them all. Out of the 15, 9 of them were pure '70s bands. That's what I like in these lists. If we're talking '70s, I would rather stick to the '70s. But those other groups, the '70s again, was that decade, the greatest decade in music. There was so much going on in that 10-year span. So
Do you think the music of the 70s is better than the music of the 60s?
we're gonna save that for another show.
All right.
I think that's a show, or at least half a show. Yeah. But so the true '70s bands that I named were the Allman Brothers, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Black Sabbath, Chicago, Steely Dan, the Eagles, Aerosmith, Queen, Earth, Wind and Fire.
Great record. Great band.
I knew I was forgetting someone. Earth, Wind and Fire is definitely in worthy of that mention of greatest '70s bands.
Yeah.
So, well, all right, buddy. We did another show.
Man, we ran over 14 minutes.
It's okay. It's okay. So, for everybody listening, this podcast is on Spotify. It's on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and several other podcast platforms. For the people watching, thank you for tuning in. We're here every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. We can be seen on YouTube Live, the Milk Crates and Turntables channel, Facebook Live, and Twitch, Milk Crates and Turntables. So that's it for this show. I always appreciate your time, my friend.
Hey, we didn't mention Grand Funk.
Hardworking band, but a couple of good songs. And listen, they did a remake of Locomotion. I don't that right there just doesn't do it for me.
It's out. They're out as a result of that one.
I'm a purist. You know that. I'm a purist. I don't tolerate remakes of old 50 songs and the Grateful Dead. So that's it, buddy. Stay on for a minute while I sign off. Again, everybody, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. To quote my favorite artist, Morrissey, doing this show for you, the pleasure, the privilege is mine. And of course, my good friend Jax. So we'll see you next week, 9 o'clock, on those social media channels. And the podcast usually gets released on Fridays and Mondays sometimes. So please look for it. If you like it on Apple Podcasts, give it 5 stars. We'd appreciate it. Or give us as many stars as you think we deserve. But please give us feedback. We're at the beginning of a long run, and we're not going to stop until we make this a perfect podcast. And we need you guys to do it. So, again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next week. Milk Crates